Welcome back to Southern Life. We recently did a survey on our channel of the best places to live in Florida. You guys voted, and overwhelmingly you guys believe that Sarasota, Florida is the best place to live in Florida. So according to the survey, you guys believe that Sarasota is by far the best place to live in Florida. If you have another city that you think is better than Sarasota, let me know in the comments section, because I'm soon going to be publishing the top 10 best places to live in Florida. And for 2025 has been the most difficult list I've ever made, because to be honest, I'm very indecisive on what exactly makes a city good in 2025. I believe that incomes are very important today. The ratio of cost to living is very important for some. Also, feeling comfortable and in a welcoming city seems important to a lot of people. So what makes a metropolitan area or a city great? And what are those great cities in Florida? I need you guys to let me know in the comments today, because that video will be coming out soon, and the time to cry and complain would be now, not once I finally make up my mind on what the list is for 2025. The state of Florida is dealing with incomes not being enough to sustain cost of living, increasing costs of insurance, real estate, and property taxes. The state of Florida is also dealing with a lot of ecological, natural disaster, and economical disasters like mass exoduses for many different reasons. All that means that cities that have the most resilient economies are the ones that people are most likely to want to end up in. But as of now, according to our survey, you guys believe that Sarasota is the best place to live in Florida. And it could be so. The city came out resilient after 2 hurricanes hit this area. It was able to rebuild fairly quickly. We're still dealing with the aftermath of the red tide. This naturally occurring situation only gets worse after hurricanes, and Southwest Florida is having a lot of red tide, but it seems like the Sarasota area hasn't got the worst of it so far. The area's economy has been strong enough to support the city even in the aftermath of a hurricane. Tourism has practically disappeared in the year 2025 for many international reasons, state reasons, and even local reasons. Combined with political changes, we have also hurricane aftermath. Tourism and other industries here have suffered greatly, and the rebuilding after hurricane means that this is a very difficult and challenging time for many people in this area. But despite all that, the city seems to be fighting back, and while things are not as great as we would have hoped they would be right now, the city is still looking good. We've been doing little gigs like food deliver and ride share, and Sarasota comes out better than Fort Myers, better than Naples, better than Tampa, better than St. Pete. It really seems like a city where there's always something going on, whether it's events, weddings, or just people coming into town to do something. Which means that despite the fact that the regular tourism, the beaches, is dead, there's still enough mobility where even with small little gigs, you can see money trickling down. I recently been going into Tampa doing these rideshare and food delivery gigs, and the prices there on tips cannot compare to Sarasota. And keep in mind that while many people consider these gigs insignificant, if an area has very little gig work available, it means that people are really cash strapped and willing to do whatever it takes to take those jobs. When those jobs are plentiful and people are tipping, it lets you know that people are living good. Now, this year has been hard for just about everybody in Florida for a diverse amount of reasons. But I do believe that after my recent visit to Miami and Fort Lauderdale, that the vibes, environment, and nightlife over there far outweighs what's going on here in Sarasota. This area has really been hit hard by the hurricanes. And I don't want to break anybody's hearts, but when I make my list of the top 10 best places to live in Florida, there's going to be a few disappointments. I noticed that Miami ranked really low on those lists that I made. And I've always said that Miami is a lot better city than many people perceive. A lot of people just hate Miami, but my experiences in Miami have been pretty good. In fact, in recent years, I can't even think of a bad experience ever traveling to Miami. And while I haven't done any gig work in Miami, every time I'm in Miami, I turn on the apps just to see how things are moving. And sometimes it isn't looking that bad. It's looking better than over here. So you guys let me know your thoughts and opinions clearly, because this is a video that once I make it will reach a lot of people like it does every single year. And people will use this video to gauge where they're going to be moving to in Florida over the next year. So it's important that you guys input. We understand clearly where everybody stands on each one of these cities. I'm thinking Naples, Boca Raton, Jupiter, Kendall. What about the Jacksonville area? Areas like Nacogdoches, St. Johns County, Nassau County. Clay County analytically doesn't rank too bad, although I'm personally not a fan of Clay County because of its traffic congestion. You guys need to let me know everything you guys think about these Florida cities, because I'm working on this list and I'm a little indecisive. Deep down, I like Sarasota because it's balanced. It isn't the absolute best in one direction, but it's somewhat of like a middle ground of everything you want from a city, where the compromises are perfect. It's not too big where it's like a giant nightmare, and it's not too small to where it doesn't have nightlife. Sarasota has enough nightlife. It has enough of everything you'd want, from good beaches. It isn't so big that it's too big, and it isn't so small that it doesn't have things. Sarasota really seems to be like the perfect city. Does it have the highest incomes? No. Does it have the best food? No. It isn't exactly the best at anything other than perhaps maybe beaches. But we do have to consider that with the red tide in the Gulf of Mexico and all the hurricane destruction, it's going to be a while before those beaches rebound to what they used to be. I would say that overall jobs in Sarasota are very good. Opportunities are well. Equality among races is actually really good here. For example, Sarasota's Hispanic household income is the largest of any large urban county. There's a few small counties that have higher incomes for Hispanics, but keep in mind those are very small counties. When you talk about larger urban counties, no other county in Florida has a better household income for Hispanics, and that's a good indicator of how fair the market is here. This is a place where it's urban, but it has a lot of opportunity. It's a very fair distribution of money, not as polarizing as, let's say, Naples, or as competitive as Miami, where everybody's fighting for the same jobs. Along the Florida Panhandle, I know when it comes to natural beauty, they absolutely win. But when it comes to welcoming people, friendliness, they are not very high up there. And also, their incomes, while they are very high, I do believe that for the average working person, the Florida Panhandle is just too seasonal, and a lot of the locals are starving. While the incomes appear to be pretty good along the Florida Panhandle, there's somewhat of a distortion of analytics because there's a lot of people with money along the beach, but then go a few miles inland and the regular average person is really struggling in the Florida Panhandle. So while natural beauty plays a huge role into our list, enough more than jobs, that's really the determination that we also have to make before we make the list for 2025, because the Florida Panhandle has the best natural beauty. And despite the fact analytics on paper appear pretty good for some of these counties, the reality is that that's not the case for everybody. There's somewhat of an economical inequality where along the coast you have a lot of wealthy people that bring up the analytics. But again, that isn't the picture for the average working class person. Then the Florida Panhandle is overwhelmingly seasonal, with only seeing tourists during the summer. It is a ghost town during the winter, which is a great time to enjoy the Florida Panhandle without all the tourists. But what if you depend on those jobs that they bring? So all that means that the Florida Panhandle, despite its overwhelming natural beauty, may for my list be exempt once again. I really want to include the Florida Panhandle on my list. I'm carefully watching the analytics. They're doing great with the analytics, especially income. The problem with the Florida Panhandle is that it continues to be extraordinarily unwelcoming. As long as I'm seeing emails from people telling me that they moved to the Florida Panhandle and they had to move out because the teachers, the police officers, and other people in the community ran them out because they were Asian or Hispanic, or that they encountered a lot of racial hostility, I'm not going to put you on one of these lists. So the Florida Panhandle, until you become a more welcoming place to everyone, not just some people. For example, the Florida Panhandle has become a great place for a lot of Midwestern people. You're seeing license plates from Wisconsin, Minnesota, all over, Iowa as well, all over the Florida Panhandle. But I make these lists for everybody. And for the Florida Panhandle, as long as you are not welcoming to everybody, there's no room for you on my list. The analytics for racial inequality on income look good for the Florida Panhandle. In fact, much better than some of the urban counties in Florida. But there's really a catch to that, and it is that usually minorities are going to make more money in places where they are really literally risking their lives to be there type situation. And that's all over the country. Where counties are more comfortable, larger Latino populations, those analytics are actually worse. So that's what's interesting about income analytics for minorities, is that sometimes where you are most comfortable is where you are most disadvantaged, and the more risk you take by moving to areas where there are less of you, you actually increase your income potential significantly. For example, there's counties in the Florida Panhandle where a Hispanic family will make 2 times more income than a Hispanic family in South Florida. This is the same exact effect that I explained to you guys when I moved to Alabama, where I increased my income dramatically. Now, there's different facets to that situation, and it's really important that we understand this before we make our video of the best places to live in Florida. Migrant communities have really watered down the labor force in South Florida. And it isn't that the labor force in South Florida is any different than, let's say, Bay County. Yeah, I know you think I'm crazy, but I made that comparison. Yes, Bay County, Panama City Beach. It's the same exact economy, because the people there that play the servant role are just a completely different group of people, but it's the same concept of extremely elite along the beach, with everybody else trying to leech off of them, but it never being enough to cover their cost of living expenses, leaving the servant class to be extremely economically marginalized and an income inequality. It's literally the same thing with a different population group. It's the same economical structure, but with different demographics. Now, many people believe that illegal labor kind of is a watering down effect in the income gaps, but I don't believe that's the case. I believe when you put too many people in the same spot that have the same disadvantage, it just makes those people fight against each other. Businesses spring up competing against each other, where in other places there's plenty of rooms to spread your legs. For example, we see here in South Florida where a person will open a Colombian restaurant, and then somebody else will open a Colombian restaurant right next door. Now, there weren't enough customers for one of those businesses to survive, but now there's 2 of them competing for the same customer base that wasn't enough to begin with. Where if somebody were to open up a Colombian restaurant in the Florida Panhandle, they would have literally no competition. But eventually they would face exterior pressures, for example, from the good old boy system, other businesses. Code enforcement may try to get their businesses shut down. I've seen businesses, when they open up in faraway places in Florida, they'll have the county try to shut them down. They'll have the inspectors. They'll have the building code people. They'll just have like innumerable amount of legal opposition, we could call it, from local government or officials or other businesses trying to run these people out of town. And many times they are successful in running these businesses out of town that on their own merits would have been very successful. So what many Latino businesses have done is they've adapted by being very flexible, having the ability to start in a city, work things out, and be able to move to another city eventually, knowing that eventually the exterior pressures will crush them, but they have a plan to bail out before that happens. And that has created kind of mobile Latin communities where they go from place to place until those social pressures cannot crush them. And this is a huge problem for many people trying to establish themselves in these counties. And that is why the incomes for those counties that are the most uncomfortable and unwelcoming for some groups is also where you have the highest incomes. It's something that I personally experienced in Alabama, where I was able to make more money than I had ever made before, easier than I had ever made before. But eventually, there were so many exterior pressures on me that for my safety, I wasn't able to stay there. And again, we're talking about U.S. citizens with legitimate businesses, legitimate investments, who have to walk away from a very profitable situation because they're not wanted in that community based on their race. And it's very sad that this is a real situation that we're experiencing, but even to the point where now businesses are starting to adapt to the notion that they can't really concrete fix themselves into these communities, but have to be somewhat more transient in their investments because they know what's going to happen with them if their businesses are successful. Eventually, they get ran out. Whether it's the building department, the code enforcement, or the inspectors, they always find a way to screw up businesses when the money is coming from an exterior place. Basically, anybody who's a minority. And this means that for the most part, despite the fact that these counties in the Florida Panhandle have great income analytics for minorities, most minorities are not going to risk being there permanently. They're there transiently. And that's a horrible thing. And again, that's why I can't put these places on my list. But then when you come back to South Florida and the larger urban cores of the state, the problem is that now everybody there is kind of trapped in a bottle and they can't leave this little bubble that they're in, because if they do, they're more vulnerable. If they do it, they always have the potential to make more income, but if they leave that bubble, then they're also more vulnerable. People with children in particular are afraid to make that leap, knowing that even in the school systems, they're going to face some type of opposition. So when we talk about the best places to live in Florida, unfortunately, a lot of people have to choose the option that is economically more of a constraint, because not everybody is able to just get up and move to a place that is very unwelcoming to outsiders. And in the case of places like Bay County, Florida, it isn't just minorities. It's somewhat of a good old boy system, and anybody trying to implement themselves there economically is going to have to jump through some hoops, make some alignments, or they're eventually going to get ran out themselves. Part of business and legality is also the court systems, and when you have a kangaroo court county, like for example, Bay County or some of these other counties in Florida up there in the Panhandle, where they basically have the whole county in a show code, individuals are going to be afraid to make any type of business gesture up there because they know that if they have to end up in a courtroom, or if they get hurt, something unfortunate happens, and they end up in a legally binding situation, there's a lot of nepotism within the court system, if not an outright kangaroo court system, and that also scares people from investing in that area. So these are problems that the Florida Panhandle has to fix before I can put it on my list. Because when we talk about safety, it isn't just crime analytics. Crime analytics are part of safety, but today you have to be concerned about legalities of defending yourself, your family, and your business. You have to worry about nepotism. You have to worry about racism. You have to worry about court systems. All that plays into safety for people. So economical well-being isn't just attributed to what the numbers say at the top for your particular demographic. Look at it as somebody trying to sell you a franchise that looks really good on paper, but the moment you buy it, it's going to crumble. When you talk about safety and long-term sustainability of somebody moving to a community, there's a lot more with safety-related issues than just what the analytics are for those counties. You have to look at how things are actually going to work out for you, how people are actually going to treat you. When an inspector comes to your business, are they going to treat you with the same smiles and favoritism as they do their buddies, or are they going to be out there with the intention of completely annihilating your business and disrupting your life? For a lot of people, peace of mind is kind of something difficult to put a value on. So when I make this list for the best place to live in Florida, the Florida Panhandle, it's not going to make a difference if you improve your analytics, if your reputation and practices of how you treat our people continue to be the same.